Everyone experiences moments when the world seems to descend into chaos. Questions plague the mind. Why does fate bring us together with those who cause pain? Why does a beloved job suddenly disappear from our lives? Why do loved ones leave without a word? Where do childhood traumas come from, and why does a sense of emptiness linger even when everything seems perfect? But what if all these events aren't just random blows of fate? What if behind every pain, every loss, lies something more, a design we can't yet see? This isn't just a set of comforting words, but a deep dive into psychology based on the work of CarlJung, one of the greatest thinkers of our time. He argued that everything that happens to us, even the most painful, is necessary to bring us to where we are now. Jung didn't believe in coincidences. His words, "What you deny submits you, what you accept transforms you," are more than just a beautiful quote. They contain a profound meaning. Nothing happens without a reason. Every event, every encounter, every loss, even every mistake has its purpose, often hidden from our conscious mind. This purpose is to show us what we couldn't see on our own. And when we finally realize this, our lives will change forever. What awaits is a deep dive into oneself, an experience so transformative that the previous view of the past will become impossible. One will learn to perceive their life not as a chaotic accumulation of events, whether painful experiences, triumphs, or failures, but as a purposeful narrative, artfully created by the subconscious with the aim of awakening, healing, and restoring the true essence. It's important to realize that no event in life was accidental. Everything is subject to cause and effect. This awareness will radically change thinking, feelings, and lifestyle. This narrative has a single goal: to transform perception, as changing one's view of life entails its complete transformation. This idea isn't new. Jung, who dedicated his life to exploring the mysteries of the human soul, expressed it. By remaining attentive to the end, everyone will discover the truth that frees them from the burden of misunderstanding, realizing that they aren't a victim of circumstances but a product of the deep intelligence living within. In everyone's life there are emotional wounds that refuse to heal, as if reminding us of the unresolved mysteries of the past. These traumas continue to resonate with pain because we avoid looking into their depths to understand what messages they carry. The great psychologist CarlJung argued that the symbols and archetypes living in our unconscious are constantly trying to convey important truths to us, but most people have lost the ability to hear this inner voice. At the same time, questions arise. Why do we repeatedly make the same mistakes? Why do our relationships invariably end in pain and disappointment? Why do we hinder our own success when we're on the verge of great achievements? And why is it so difficult for us to trust others? All of this isn't a random coincidence, but a logical consequence, the roots of which go into our subconscious. Jung convincingly proved that until we become aware of the content of our unconscious, it will control our lives, and we'll naively believe that this is our fate. However, there's an opportunity to break this vicious cycle. Instead of offering ready-made answers, effective tools based on years of psychological research are offered to help independently uncover these hidden truths. The path to healing can be painful, as growth is always associated with discomfort. But ultimately, it will lead to a sense of peace that was previously unattainable. There's nothing more liberating than realizing that everything that happened in our lives had a deep meaning and wasn't a random set of circumstances. Together we'll embark on a fascinating journey into the world of symbols and archetypes born in the depths of the collective unconscious. We'll delve into reflections on predestination, the mysteries of dreams, and the phenomenon of projections to realize that the world around us is nothing more than a mirror reflection of the unintegrated aspects of our inner essence. This path will be an opportunity for you to reclaim the lost parts of yourself, stop the exhausting struggle with the past, and finally accept it as an integral part of your experience. If you've ever had a sense of meaninglessness, if you've wondered about the repeating scenarios in your life, if you're tired of the vicious circle that eludes understanding, then this narrative is addressed to you. As a result of this research, you'll gain knowledge inaccessible to many. the realization that your soul has always been your faithful guide. You'll understand that you aren't alone and aren't lost, that you're led by a powerful force beyond your imagination. CarlJung called it the process of individuation, the soul's striving for wholeness. Every painful situation in your life has been nothing more than a call to return to yourself. We will systematically analyze each layer of your experience, exploring your behavioral patterns, relationships, and decisions from a completely new perspective. You will discover that what seemed like a mistake was actually an impulse to move forward, that what was perceived as a loss turned out to be liberation, and that your deepest wound can become the source of your greatest strength. The presented video material is not just a collection of information, but a catalyst for profound changes in consciousness. It can evoke a wide range of emotions, from mental anguish to a sense of confusion, but ultimately brings healing. When the realization comes that no life experience has been meaningless, the fruitless struggle with circumstances ceases, and a harmonious movement in the flow of life begins. The appearance of this video in the viewer's field of vision is by no means accidental. It is likely that his soul is already ready to accept truths that are still eluding rational understanding. If the viewer is patient and watches the video to the end, he will not only comprehend these truths, but also feel them with his whole being. He will realize at a deep level that all the events in his life, even those that he cannot yet forgive, had a certain meaning. This video brings together the rational and the emotional, the scientific and the spiritual, the psychological and the esoteric. Only such integration allows one to achieve genuine healing. Carl Jung sought not only to analyze human behavior, but to awaken the soul dormant in every human being. This is precisely the goal of this video. The viewer will be asked questions that he may never have thought of before. He will face his shadow sides, fears, and inner resistance, but he will also be shown his own light, his potential for transformation, and his immense inner strength. After all, when a person changes, the world around him changes as well. Every phrase in this video is designed to make the viewer think, to distract him from the external noise, and to listen to his inner voice. Not to judge himself, but to understand, not to run away from his past, but to accept it with gratitude. After all, everything he was before has led him to where he is now. And if he is watching this video, it means he is ready to let go of guilt, to look at the world with new eyes, and to turn his wounds into a source of wisdom. Regardless of past trials, everyone has the ability to rethink their experience and give it new meaning. We will talk about those very synchronicities, seemingly random coincidences, about premonitions that were ignored, about people who appeared at the most opportune moment. This is not just luck, but the result of the work of the subconscious mind, which was looking for a way out and found it. This is a space for those who strive for more than just survival, for those who yearn for understanding, healing, and a meaningful life. If a person's gaze has turned to these words, it means that his soul is seeking answers, and they will be given. After this narrative, life will appear in a completely new light. It will become clear that the pain experienced carried a certain message, that the people met were a kind of herald, and that everyone's story has a purpose, far more significant than one could have imagined. It is important to remember, nothing is accidental, everything has its reason. And today it will become clear why Carl Jung claimed that meeting oneself is first and foremost meeting one's own shadow. This phrase contains one of the most complex, yet liberating truths on the path to self-knowledge. It is impossible to move forward until there is a collision with that part of oneself that one does not want to look at, the part that is projected onto others, the part that is rejected or suppressed because it seems unacceptable. Jung argued that only by recognizing one's shadow can one begin to integrate it, and it is from this that genuine transformation begins. It often happens that events perceived as a personal catastrophe actually turn out to be a call for deep self-analysis, for exploring those aspects of one's own personality that a person has stubbornly ignored for a long time. The termination of a relationship, the collapse of hopes, or the loss of a job can serve as signals from life, prompting one to stop and pay attention to something overlooked. Life seems to be asking, what are you avoiding seeing in yourself? In such moments, it is helpful to pause, close your eyes for a moment, and honestly answer the question, what part of yourself does a person refuse to accept? As CarlJung argued, what remains unconscious inevitably manifests in life in the form of fate. This is not just a beautiful metaphor, but a serious warning. Recurring painful situations indicate that something within a person is persistently seeking a way out. The subconscious knows no limits, has no moral principles, is not subject to time, and does not pass judgment. Its sole purpose is to make a person whole, integrated, and conscious. It is worth recalling the event that caused the greatest pain. Perhaps it was a sudden loss, betrayal, or a decision that one would like to change today. If you look at this event from a different angle, you can see that it was precisely this event that forced the person to develop new qualities, to discover what awakened in them that had previously been dormant. Sometimes pain is the only way the soul can open its eyes. Jung believed that the subconscious has its own logic. It does not strive for superficial happiness, but is interested in the integrity of the personality. To achieve this integrity, it is necessary to know both the light and dark sides of oneself. This process, called individuation by Jung, is a path to personal integration. Everything that happens in life, even the most absurd and unfair, is aimed at achieving this goal. It is suggested to take a piece of paper and a pencil to complete one exercise. It is necessary to make a list of those events in life that left a painful mark. Under each of them, you should indicate what qualities you managed to develop thanks to this experience: inner strength, resilience to life's adversities, independence in decision-making, and the ability to establish personal boundaries. This simple exercise is designed to help you see that there is a valuable lesson hidden behind every difficult period. It is not about justifying the pain experienced, but about understanding that it became an impetus for awakening. C.G. Jung also spoke of synchronicity, phenomena that seem like simple coincidences but have a deep meaning for those who experience them. Surely it has happened that at a time of acute need for an answer, the right person appeared, an important phrase was heard, or some sign arose. This is not an accident but a manifestation of cause and effect. The universe responds when the soul is ready to perceive but not before. The external reality is a reflection of the inner world of a person. Jung emphasized that people see the world not as it is in reality, but as they are themselves. If the same type of relationships, conflicts, or losses are constantly attracted into life, this indicates the presence of certain internal problems that require awareness, healing, and transformation. This does not mean that a person is doomed to suffering. It is a call to awakening. Take a close look at the relationships closest to your heart and ask yourself, what consistent patterns and trends can be traced in them? Do you have difficulty establishing clear boundaries that protect your personal space? Are you haunted by the feeling that you invariably put more effort, time, and resources into relationships than you receive in return? Do you build your relationships out of a sense of acute need and dependence, or do they arise from a state of inner harmony and self-sufficiency? These questions are by no means intended to pass a harsh verdict on you, but on the contrary, they are aimed at freeing you from the shackles of ignorance and misunderstanding. By answering them honestly and sincerely, you begin to see yourself in a new light, with crystal clarity realizing your motives and actions. And when you see yourself, you gain the ability to make conscious choices and act differently, more effectively, and harmoniously. Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, spoke of archetypes, universal, human models that are inherent in each of us to one degree or another. Among them, we can distinguish such archetypes as the hero, the sage, the shadow, the lover, and the inner child. Each of these archetypes lives inside you, manifesting and activating at various moments in your life, depending on the circumstances and experiences. And if you have knowledge of these archetypes, you can use them in your interests, directing their energy in a constructive direction. However, if you ignore their existence and do not realize their influence, they will use you, often not in the best way. Have you ever had the feeling that your life is stuck in a vicious circle, repeating the same scenarios and plots over and over again? Have you wondered why your emotional reactions and experiences are repeated with manic persistence like a broken record? This is because you are not working with the root cause, with the deep root of the problem, which is safely hidden in your subconscious. Jung taught us that we must return to our childhood, not to remain forever trapped in the past, mired in memories and regrets, but to regain what was valuable and lost to us once: immediacy, spontaneity, sincerity, and a deep connection with who we are at our core. Childhood memories, like shards of mirrors, hold moments that can still touch the deepest chords of our soul. Whether they are painted in light or dark tones, each one is a brick in the foundation of our personality. Immersing ourselves in the past as if in a shadow play, we should try to understand what character traits, what beliefs were formed under the influence of past experiences. This act of self-analysis, like a spotlight, can highlight in us what has long remained hidden in the darkness of the subconscious. Pain and confusion are not enemies, but rather faithful allies on the path of self-discovery. They are like signal lights, pointing to those areas of our soul that need healing. CarlJung, a prominent Swiss psychiatrist, argued that symptoms are nothing more than the soul's attempts to reach a consciousness that stubbornly refuses to accept the obvious. Instead of complaining about fate and asking, "Why is this happening to me?" it is worth rephrasing the question and asking yourself, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" How easy it is to blame others, bad luck, or an unfair system. How easy it is to justify your inertia with phrases like, "I'm just unlucky," or "This always happens to me." But Jung, like a wise mentor, warns against such short-sightedness. He argues that there is a part of us that subconsciously chooses this path, not to punish, but to awaken, to bring out of a state of hibernation. Stop for a moment, close your eyes and ask yourself, what benefit do I get from remaining in my current state? What does my inability to change give me? What am I afraid of losing if I heal from old wounds? These questions, like a surgical scalpel, can cause pain, but they are the only ones that can free you from the shackles of the past. After all, awareness of your resistance is the first step towards its transformation, towards finding inner harmony and integrity. Psychologists say that healing will not come until a person accepts their problems. Change is impossible until you acknowledge the existence of difficulties. Jung emphasized that recognition is the first step towards transformation, and recognition not just with the mind, but with all your heart. This is a moment of truth, when a person looks the truth in the eye and realizes the need for change. Perhaps the appearance of this video in a person's life is not an accident, but a sign of fate, sent in a moment of despair and willingness to give up. It is worth taking this as synchronicity, as a message from the subconscious that seeks to be heard. If this video touched your soul, you are invited to leave a comment with the phrase, "My soul does not forget what my mind denies." This will be a statement of readiness to stop running away from problems and start to recognize them. Jung said that trauma is not the event itself, but the misunderstanding of its consequences. That is why some people heal from tragedies, while others break from minor wounds. The difference lies in consciousness, in the ability to look at what happened from a new perspective. Acceptance is not smerenia, but maturity. It is the ability to look at your history and say, "I would not have chosen this path, but since it has been proiden, I will learn a lesson from it." This is the power, awakening, and evolution of the individual. Pain, contrary to popular belief, pursues a lofty goal: to awaken a person from a state of spiritual hibernation. Life, like a wise mentor, uses pain not to cause suffering, but to sharpen awareness. Often, only on the ruins of former hopes and aspirations do we find our true self. If fate has brought you into the abyss of despair, do not lose faith. Perhaps right now you are at the point predetermined for your spiritual growth. As the prominent psychologist CarlJung argued, the human soul has an insatiable thirst for wholeness. No matter how many times you stray from the path, fall or retreat, your soul tirelessly seeks ways to return to you. Sometimes this return comes in the form of a crisis, sometimes through meeting certain people, and sometimes through a voice coming from a video like this one. It is important to remember the immutable truth. Past events do not define your essence. Your true self is formed by how you react to these events. Right now, you have the opportunity to look at everything that has happened as a starting point for deep transformation. You are not broken, you are in the process of rebuilding. One of Jung's most significant teachings states, "What you reject in yourself will ultimately destroy you from within." And it's not about malicious intent, but about a desperate desire to be recognized. Each of us carries hidden aspects of personality, jealousy, anger, fear, insecurity, suppressed desires. Until we acknowledge their existence, these aspects manifest as symptoms, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, recurring conflicts. Shadow, as Jung called it, is not your enemy, but rather a teacher who can teach you a lot. Carl Jung made a breakthrough, significantly expanding the horizons of psychoanalytic theory proposed by Sigmund Freud. While Freud focused on the role of the ego and the mechanisms of repression in the emergence of neurotic states, Jung discovered the concept of the collective unconscious, a comprehensive system of archetypal symbols and meanings inherent in all humanity. Thus, the individual is the carrier not only of personal experience, but also of the legacy of generations. People often encounter inexplicable obstacles on the path to their goals, feeling the influence of some invisible force that constrains their freedom of choice. Jung called this phenomenon archetypal possession, when a dominant mental complex subordinates a person's behavior. At such moments, the personality is neither insane nor broken, but rather fragmented. However, according to Jung, there is a possibility of restoring integrity. He argued that neurosis is an individual, albeit imperfect, attempt to resolve a deep existential problem. In other words, anxiety, sadness, and internal blocks are manifestations of the soul's desire for adaptation and conflict resolution. However, being unconscious, these attempts turn into fetters, and awareness opens the way to healing and personal growth. In the modern world, people are increasingly losing touch with their true feelings, finding themselves trapped in imposed ideas of what they should think, feel, and how they should behave. Carl Jung argued that individuation, that is, the process of becoming oneself, is a kind of rebellion against blind adaptation to social norms. A person comes into this world not to be someone else's copy, but to remember their true essence. This process can be painful, since it is first necessary to realize who you are not. In the same vein, Viktor Frankl, an outstanding psychologist, emphasized that if we cannot change the situation, then our task is to change ourselves. This is the essence of the causality that Jung put forward. Events do not happen by chance, but to cause changes, and these changes begin within us. It is worth looking at your life as a narrative, where each painful episode, each significant person, each unexpected event has its own meaning, if you consider them as part of the path of transformation. The person is the main character of this story, and, like all the main characters, they go through trials, losses, and symbolic deaths. However, at the end of this path, if you look at what is happening consciously, resurrection always comes. Jung compared depression to a woman dressed in black. He advised not to push her away if she came, but to invite her to sit down and listen to what she wants to say. This is a very deep thought, because modern society has learned to run away from pain, treat it, and force it to be silent. However, depth psychology argues that this pain has a message, and until a person hears it, the pain will not leave them alone. Recently, everyone could face the suppression of some emotion, whether it is fear, sadness, envy, or loneliness. It is recommended to take a piece of paper and write down the name of this emotion. Then you should try to understand what exactly this emotion is trying to convey. Perhaps behind it lies an unsatisfied need or an unhealed wound. This simple act of honesty with oneself can be a powerful tool for restoring inner strength. Sigmund Freud spoke of the conflict between instinctive desires, id, the conscious I, ego, and moral principles, superego. Carl Jung went further, integrating the spiritual dimension of the human being into his theory. He believed that it is not enough to simply explain a person's behavior, it is necessary to look into their soul and understand that we are not just biological beings or a set of drives. We are symbols, we are myths, we are energies striving for integrity. Erich Fromm argued that modern man has lost the meaning of his existence because he has lost touch with himself. Jung would say that he has lost contact with the self, the central and wise core that guides our lives. How to restore this connection? Through silence, introspection, art, symbols, dreams, and meditation. Not running away from yourself in a hurry, but stopping and listening to your inner voice. Suspend the rush of time and turn your gaze inward. What aspects of your personality have been neglected? What potential lies dormant, buried under the weight of doubts? What truth have you preferred to hide, fearing that you will not find your place in the social order? Your essence came into this world not to dissolve into a faceless mass, but to awaken to the awareness of your uniqueness. And often the catalyst for this awakening is a crisis, painful but necessary. Remember those who have caused you suffering. Try to see them as a mirror reflection, not to justify their actions, but to understand which strings of your soul their behavior touched. What exactly did they highlight in you? What lessons did they teach? Carl Jung argued that the strongest irritation in other people is often a reflection of unresolved internal conflicts. This is not about guilt, but about recognizing one's own incompleteness. Humans tend to strive for completeness, for a harmonious combination of light and shadow, for finding meaning even in those events that brought destruction. The path proposed by Jung is far from superficial optimism. It is a path of deep knowledge of the truth, which sometimes hurts, but ultimately grants freedom. And whoever dares to look truth in the eye will never be the same. The foundation of Jungian psychology lies in a fundamental principle. Resistance breeds persistence. If a person rejects their sadness, it can develop into depression. Suppressed anger transforms into passive aggression. Fear that is not given an outlet turns into anxiety. But if you go through these feelings, accept them, integrate them into your personality, you can free yourself from their power and stop being their prisoner. According to Carl Jung, one of the most forgotten abilities of the human psyche is the symbol. Dreams, mythological tales, and metaphorical expressions are not just figments of the imagination, but a special language. The subconscious does not use direct speech. It communicates through images. And if a person masters the art of interpreting these images, they will gain access to deep wisdom that no higher education institution can provide. Therefore, if a vivid, memorable dream visits you one night, do not neglect it. It is recommended to write it down in the smallest detail and then analyze it as if it were a movie sent by your own soul. What characters appear before your eyes? What are the surrounding decorations? What feelings and experiences does this symbol evoke? A symbol does not provide ready-made answers, but it can open doors to areas of consciousness that you never even suspected existed. Jung argued that many people achieve enlightenment not through visualizing bright images, but through realizing their own inner darkness. In other words, the point is not in positive thinking, but in facing your emotional wounds and understanding the reasons for their occurrence. True spirituality does not involve escaping from the inner world, but, on the contrary, calls for a courageous confrontation with it, its acceptance and comprehensive study. Imagine a moment when you face an important dilemma that requires a balanced decision. Instead of looking for clues from the outside, turn inward. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and listen to the wise voice of your inner self. The answer may not come immediately, but by learning to trust yourself, you will stop drifting with the tide. Carl Jung spoke of causality hidden from the rational mind, but felt by the soul. Often, it is the most painful experiences that turn out to be the impetus that destroys the ego and opens our eyes to reality. Pain is a sign of a dying ego and an awakening soul. Life is not just a series of random events, but a revelation. Each situation is a disguised lesson. If you dare to look behind this mask, you will understand that nothing was in vain. Everything that happened was necessary to bring you to this point, and now your future is in your hands. Stop for a moment and look at your life as an unfinished work of art. Do not scold yourself for what you have not yet achieved, but thank yourself for the path you have taken. Start consciously creating your future. Jung argued that the meaning of life lies in self-realization, and each step on this path has its own reason. In the writings of CarlJung, there is one point that often escapes understanding. A person strives not only to satisfy needs or achieve the heights of success, as is commonly believed, but also to find meaning in existence. When meaning is lost, everything around loses its value and crumbles into pieces. It is important to note that the loss of meaning does not stem from external circumstances, but from a break in connection with oneself, with one's inner essence. When a person feels that their life lacks direction and purpose, this indicates a lack of connection with their true purpose. Discovering this purpose requires deep self-analysis and turning inward rather than searching in the external world. There are people who, it would seem, have everything they need for happiness: material well-being, loving relationships, public recognition, but at the same time they experience a feeling of inner emptiness. Jung explained this phenomenon by the loss of connection with the deep I. When a person lives, guided solely by selfish motives, a crisis sooner or later occurs. The human soul strives not for the achievement of empty and meaningless goals, but for self-realization and the unfolding of its potential. All events occurring in a person's life carry a hidden function, pushing them towards this self-realization. Each encounter has its own hidden purpose and significance. Jung asserted that connections between people are not accidental. A person attracts into their life those who are necessary for their personal growth and development. Even those who cause pain and suffering fulfill a specific function, forcing a person to awaken from spiritual slumber. Sometimes it's to learn how to set boundaries and protect oneself, sometimes to remember one's worth and dignity. And although such lessons can be painful, they remain in memory forever. Thus, no one appears in a person's life by chance. All people are mirrors, reflecting their own qualities and helping them grow and develop. The depths of the unconscious harbor a special language, often dissonant with the convictions of the rational mind. This is why solutions arise that seem devoid of logic, impulses whose nature remains a mystery, and attractions that defy established moral principles. The unconscious, like a wise counselor, signals that not everything in life is subject to the control of reason. Within each person lies something deeper, striving for self-expression, and if its needs are neglected, it will manifest itself through symptoms, crises, or tangled relationships. Repeating life scenarios are a kind of cry from the soul, indicating the presence of unresolved internal conflicts. It's not about bad luck or misfortune, but about the fact that a person has not yet learned a lesson from a particular situation. Perhaps the constant choice of partners who do not value them is a reflection of insufficient self-love. Or perhaps self-sabotage on the verge of success is explained by a subconscious belief that they are not worthy of better. This is not punishment, but a manifestation of cause and effect, a call to awaken. Many psychological traumas originate in childhood, but not because of the events themselves, but because of the inability to properly experience them. Carl Jung asserted that the inner child lives in every adult, and if its needs are ignored, it will exert a hidden influence on life. If the inner child is not surrounded by care and love, it will seek them in inappropriate places. As a practical exercise, it is suggested to write a letter to your childhood self, expressing in it the words of support and understanding that were so necessary at that moment. This practice is one of the most effective ways to reconnect with one's own essence and heal old wounds. In the fate of every person, there inevitably comes a turning point when the carefully constructed mask crumbles. This mask, created from the desire to please, meet expectations and survive in difficult circumstances, sooner or later loses its strength. And when its collapse occurs, the individual experiences a perfectly understandable fear. However, according to experts, this moment should be seen as sacred, because only after the mask falls does the opportunity arise for the birth of the true self. One should not be afraid of an identity crisis because it indicates an approach to one's authentic essence. Often, what causes the most irritation in another person is a reflection of suppressed qualities of one's own. For example, if someone seems overly selfish, it may indicate that the individual themselves has been too accommodating. If someone is perceived as cold, it probably indicates a suppressed need for distancing. As the famous psychologist CarlJung noted, everything that causes irritation in others can become a key to understanding ourselves. And the goal here is not self-flagellation, but liberation from one's own projections. The archetype of the hero lives in the depths of every personality. This is the part that, despite fear, dares to act, that, despite numerous falls, finds the strength to rise. Jung viewed this archetype as an instinctive force of evolution. Every time a person faces their fear, they activate their inner hero, and when they decide to move forward, even if their legs are shaking, they fulfill their destiny, grow and develop. The ego strives for certainty, while the soul craves expansion. The ego seeks control, while the soul seeks truth. When life takes a person out of their comfort zone, it is not to break them, but to return them to themselves. Comfort sometimes dulls the senses, but discomfort, although irritating, is a sign that something new is being born within the person. Erich Neumann, a prominent follower and student of Carl Jung, viewed the individuation process as a natural sequence of events where chaos serves as the starting point, followed by periods of turmoil and ultimately culminating in personal integration. It is crucial to emphasize that skipping any of these stages is impossible. Therefore, being in a state of chaos should not be seen as a failure, but rather as an integral part of the formation process, which, despite being painful, is a harbinger of future transformations. Jung's profound idea is that suffering loses its power over a person when it gains meaning and purpose. The ability to see a pattern in one's own history, the seed of the future, a revelation, allows a person to cease being a passive victim of circumstances and become an active creator of their destiny. Meaning is not something external, it is created internally through awareness, acceptance, and self-love. The human unconscious tirelessly works for one's benefit, even when it goes unnoticed. Every dream, intuitive hunch, emotional experience, all of this is designed to reveal what is hidden from conscious perception. By learning to listen to the voice of one's unconscious, one gains clarity and understanding. Life becomes less confusing and more meaningful, as there is an awareness that every event has its cause and purpose. Moments when everything around seems meaningless and chaotic often turn out to be the most fruitful, as it is during this period that the internal transformation of the personality takes place. Jung argued that the birth of consciousness is not without pain, not because pain is a prerequisite, but because it is often the only way the soul can force a person to stop, think, and rethink their life. A person is not just a collection of thoughts, raging emotions, or the burden of past experiences. At its core, it is a consciousness that impartially observes this kaleidoscope of experiences. And when this consciousness gains strength, it bestows the ability to act in harmony with the soul and not under the dictation of old wounds and grievances. Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, called not for achieving unattainable perfection, but for achieving wholeness. This path begins with ceasing self-condemnation and accepting all aspects of one's personality, both light and dark. Acknowledging one's own ignorance when a person sincerely says, "I don't know who I am," is not a sign of weakness, but a starting point for deep self-knowledge. Most people never ask this fundamental question, but those who dare to ask it embark on a path of personal growth and self-realization. Jung argued that the true self, the central core of personality, is always present, patiently awaiting the return of the person to their authentic essence. The question is not, who am I, but which part of me is currently dominating? Many psychological symptoms, which are often perceived as diseases, are actually signals sent by the subconscious. Anxiety can be a desperate cry of the soul, warning against the wrong path. Sadness can serve as a call to return to the most important and fundamental aspects of life. Guilt can act as an alarm bell, prompting a review of one's values and beliefs. If you learn to interpret your emotions as valuable messages and not as enemies, you can become your own healer and guide. Feeling lost is not a tragedy, but rather an opportunity. The real problem is the lack of courage to stop, look around, and try to understand the reasons for this state. Everyone gets lost from time to time, but it is important to have the courage to look at your inner map and determine the way forward. Jung argued that the greatest privilege in life is to become who you really are, and this privilege begins with a conscious decision to stop running away from yourself and start exploring the depths of your soul. Often the most responsive and empathetic personalities are those who have experienced a lot of suffering in their lives, because it is the pain they have experienced that has sharpened their perception and made them more sensitive to the world around them. If a person belongs to the category of people who have increased sensitivity, who are easily touched, and who sometimes feel overwhelmed by the burden of this world, then everything is fine with them. This means that they are alive, and this is their greatest strength. This susceptibility should be used for good, for self-improvement, for helping others, for a deep understanding of what is happening. Do not blindly chase after success, mistaking everything that glitters for it. Not every fall is a failure, and not every breakup is a loss. Looking at the situation from a different perspective, from a higher level of awareness, one can see that everything that happens carries a certain lesson, a hidden message. Perhaps a missed opportunity saved you from something more serious. Perhaps the departure of a certain person made room for someone who will turn out to be better. Perhaps the crisis experienced revealed hidden strengths in a person, the existence of which they did not even suspect. The presence of everyone in this world is not accidental. A person is here because something inside them craves more truth, more depth, more freedom. And if they have reached this point, then they are ready not for instant changes, but to take the first step. And that is already enough. No one can heal their emotional wounds, no one can give a ready-made answer that they themselves are not ready to find in the depths of their soul. However, a person can surround themselves with words, ideas, and voices that will remind them of who they really are. The task is to provide tools, instill hope, and help gain awareness, but everyone must go through the path on their own. Currently, everyone has the opportunity to change their life. You can look at the past days without animosity, see in the offenders involuntary mentors, and in your own mistakes. Steps to growth. Start living, guided not by guilt, but by striving for a goal. This is the true strength and awakening. Carl Jung, an outstanding thinker, was convinced that the human soul is constantly striving for development. Every event, whether insignificant or tragic, is part of a hidden map guiding us to a more perfect version of ourselves. It is not about justifying suffering, but about understanding it as a kind of signal. Jung argued that the transformation of darkness into light and awakening from lethargy are impossible without emotional experience. Thus, complex emotions play an important role in the process of genuine change. You should not avoid them, you need to observe them and realize the message they carry. One of the key concepts in Jung's teaching is daimon, an inner force that pushes a person to realize their destiny, even if its form is not always clear. Often, what seems like an insurmountable obstacle today is actually a maneuver of the daimon aimed at getting a person out of an unfavorable situation. Perhaps a painful breakup, an unexpected dismissal, or a loss became the impetus needed for awakening. Jung would advise not to dwell on the fact of what happened, but to listen to what the soul wants to achieve through this experience. Every episode of life's journey, even one that seems like a failure, carries a deep meaning and is a reflection of the soul's desire for self-knowledge. Recurring scenarios and stumbling blocks are not a manifestation of evil fate, but rather signals from the subconscious persistently demanding attention to unlearned lessons. Life seems to say, there is an important truth hidden here that you are stubbornly avoiding, and the longer a person ignores these signs, the stronger they manifest. However, at the moment of realization, a transformation occurs. The principle of synchronicity, discovered by Jung, is not a simple superstition, but an external reflection of internal needs. When the subconscious strives to convey some important information to the conscious, it begins to send symbols, signs, meetings, and situations that at first glance seem random, but in fact have a deep connection with the inner world of a person. And if this message has reached the addressee right now, it means that the soul craves understanding, and you should not neglect this call, because everything happens by chance. Jung also argued that the soul seeks its path to destiny, sometimes choosing the most unexpected routes. Perhaps a sharp turn in fate was not a mistake, but a course correction. The desire for security and stability could contradict the soul's desire for growth and development, and although at the moment it could feel like a loss, in fact it was an act of higher providence. It is important to ask yourself, what new part of me was born after this pain? What strength did I discover in myself that I didn't know about before? You should not underestimate your ability to transform. Jung proved that meeting with one's own shadow, wounds, and archetypes awakens an inexhaustible creative potential in a person. What used to destroy becomes a tool, and what used to confuse becomes a compass, but only if you take an honest and courageous look at yourself. It is likely that there comes a moment when a person decides on a deep self-analysis, questioning established beliefs and ideas about themselves. There is a need to look at your life from a different angle, not for the purpose of self-flagellation, but for the sake of gaining a deeper understanding of your own personality and motives. And if such a turning point has come, then all the experiences, no matter how painful they may have been, had their purpose. Every fall, every failure, served as an incentive to seek answers to important questions that ultimately help a person find themselves. People who caused pain inadvertently awakened the desire to heal emotional wounds. Moments of silence and solitude taught to listen to the inner voice, to trust one's intuition. Before moving on, it is worth doing one important exercise. Formulate in one sentence the main lesson that was learned from the strongest pain. It doesn't matter how insignificant or large-scale this lesson seems, it is important to express it in the form of a statement. For example, "This loss taught me to value myself," or "Thanks to this refusal I became more discerning in my choices." Say this statement aloud, listen to your feelings, feel its meaning, and if this text has become part of the awakening process, let the phrase, "Now I understand that everything had meaning," become evidence that a person has begun to look at their life through the eyes of the soul, and not as a victim of circumstances. They have the courage, abilities, and are on the right path, even if they are still overcome by fears and doubts. The most important thing has already been done. They have begun to ask questions, seek answers, wake up. And this awakening process is irreversible. Life's difficulties should not be perceived as a collapse, but rather as a period of renewal. It cannot be said that a person has gone astray. They are simply being directed in a different direction. The future promises to be more sincere, rich, and real, because life is now subject not to chance, but to deep meaning. The time has come when these principles are embodied in reality through a story filled with soul and capable of becoming personal. This story, born from the depths of the unconscious, reveals the truth. Nothing happens by chance. A person's life is not just a struggle for survival, it is an evolutionary process. Carl Jung, like no other, realized this. For him, every crisis was not a failure, but an opportunity for transformation. Pain, in his opinion, is the initiator of awakening. This view is fundamentally different from modern culture, which seeks to suppress suffering at any cost. However, by avoiding pain, a person deprives themselves of the opportunity to grow. The only way to deep healing is conscious living through pain. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust and created logotherapy, argued that having a why to live allows one to endure almost any how. This thought is closely intertwined with the idea of causality, which Jung advocated. There is nothing aimless in life. Suffering, endowed with meaning, ceases to be just suffering. It turns into a path, a mission, an inner alchemy. Abraham Maslow, reflecting on self-actualization, emphasized that only when basic needs are met does a person acquire the ability to strive for comprehensive development. However, CarlJung expanded this concept, arguing that the desire to know the soul does not stop even in conditions of hunger, suffering, or chaos. After all, our existence is not limited to simple survival. Our goal is integration, reunification with our true essence. Karen Horney introduced the concept of adaptation neurosis, describing the obsessive need to please and meet the expectations of others, even at the cost of betraying one's own beliefs. Jung would call this a loss of connection with one's own self. A life lived for others is a rejection of the soul, and when fate strikes in the form of loss or rupture, it does not mean the collapse of everything, but rather liberation from an imposed identity. Erich Fromm, in his work Escape from Freedom, analyzed the fear of a person before their own autonomy, since freedom is inextricably linked with responsibility. Jung shared this point of view. The process of individuation, although associated with discomfort, is genuine. And it is this authenticity, even if painful, that stimulates personal growth. If today you are experiencing discomfort, disorientation, and confusion, know that you are on the threshold of change. This is where your path to transformation begins. Alfred Adler, a perceptive psychologist, put forward the concept of compensation, describing the deep mechanism by which humanity transforms its vulnerabilities into sources of strength. CarlJung, in turn, viewed this phenomenon as an unconscious striving for harmony and balance. For example, if an individual has shown excessive obedience for a long time, their inner essence will undoubtedly push them to develop confidence and assertiveness. Similarly, if a person is constantly haunted by a feeling of insecurity, life will likely provide them with challenges that contribute to the disclosure of their inner strength. In this context, nothing happens by chance. Each event is a kind of training designed to help a person discover the potential hidden inside. James Hillman, a modern thinker who inherited Jungian ideas, argued that each soul has a unique code, a unique pattern that determines its destiny, wounds, and mission. If this code remains unheard, it manifests as symptoms, frustrations, and a sense of emptiness. However, if you learn to follow and honor this code, all events will become coherent, and disparate elements will begin to form a unified picture. There are times in everyone's life when it seems like everything is falling apart. Often this happens because the collapse is a necessary prelude to reconstruction. CarlJung once remarked that an unlived life is like a disease one can die from. This means that a person comes into this world not just for comfortable existence, but for an intense and fulfilling life. To achieve this, it is sometimes necessary to let go of what causes pain, puts pressure, and prevents moving forward. In the intricacies of human existence, social masks like artful camouflage facilitate our adaptation to the changing conditions of society. However, when these masks grow into us, becoming an integral part of our personality, they paradoxically alienate us from our true essence. Carl Jung, a perceptive explorer of the depths of the human psyche, dubbed this social shell persona, a carefully constructed image that we present to the world. But behind this carefully constructed persona lies our authentic self, our innermost self, which passionately longs to break free. What we often mistakenly take for an identity crisis is in fact nothing more than a rebellion of the soul which can no longer tolerate lies and hypocrisy. Anxiety, insomnia, apathy, these ailments, so common in the modern world, are often not independent diseases but rather persistent signals, warnings that our lives are out of sync with the voice of the soul. The body, this sensitive barometer of our inner state, begins to shout at the top of its lungs when the soul is neglected for too long. Jung, like a wise mentor, tirelessly repeated, "What is not made conscious comes to us as fate. Your symptom is not a curse, but your path, your chance for healing and transformation. Listen to its quiet whisper. Try to understand its hidden meaning. Psychology, according to Jung, should serve not only to classify and catalogue diseases, but also to awaken souls, to return a person to themselves. Jung deeply understood that behind every trauma, behind every painful experience, there is a symbol, a mission waiting for its hour. Therefore, his approach to psychotherapy was integrative, holistic. He did not divide a person into healthy and sick, but saw only two states, conscious and unconscious. And each of us, according to Jung, has the freedom to move from one state to another. One only has to decide to truly face one's history, recognize one's traumas, and integrate them into one's personality. Consider the mysterious images that arise in your nightly dreams, not plans and aspirations, but those very dreams that visit you in the arms of Morpheus. CarlJung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, argued that these bizarre visions contain the deep wisdom of the soul. Do not neglect them, diminish their importance, or dismiss them as meaningless nonsense. On the contrary, it is necessary to carefully analyze each dream, because they may contain answers to questions that your conscious eye stubbornly refuses to notice. The symbols and absurd scenarios unfolding in dreams are messages that the unconscious uses to open your eyes to what needs to be integrated into your personality. Modern culture, obsessed with speed and efficiency, craves instant solutions and immediate gratification of all needs. However, the human psyche is much more complex. The soul needs time, depth, and leisure to realize and accept important truths. Jung understood that the process of personal transformation is a slow but irreversible path. Once awakened to awareness, a person can no longer return to a state of ignorance, and although this path may seem lonely and difficult, it is worth every step, every effort spent on self-discovery. Many of the conflicts tearing modern humanity apart are not political or economic, but spiritual in nature. People have lost touch with their inner world, focusing solely on the external aspects of life. They desperately try to fill the gaping void with material goods, relationships, and social status. However, this emptiness cannot be filled by external factors. It can only be filled with meaning, and meaning, as you know, is within each of us. The feeling of guilt is a burden that many carry in their souls, often without realizing the true reasons for its occurrence. As the eminent psychologist CarlJung asserted, guilt is not always a direct consequence of committed actions. Often, it stems from a profound misunderstanding of oneself and the surrounding world. If an individual feels haunted by a long-standing sense of guilt, it is necessary to pause and carefully analyze its origins. It is important to ask oneself, is this feeling of guilt truly a personal experience, or has it been inherited from ancestors, imposed by society, or assimilated during upbringing? Often, liberation from this oppressive feeling becomes the first step towards attaining inner freedom and harmony. Compassion emerges as a powerful tool for healing, applicable not only to others, but also to oneself. It is important to remember that no one is advocating for leniency towards oneself, as only that which is viewed with love and understanding is capable of transformation. Rigidity and inflexibility of thinking lead to stagnation and paralysis, while deep understanding liberates and opens new horizons. Not all pain requires immediate elimination. Some suffering needs to be understood and accepted as part of life's experience. When a person approaches their history with an open heart and soul, a re-evaluation of all that has been experienced occurs. Former enemies appear as teachers, and failures are perceived as valuable stages in the process of personal growth. This is not a manifestation of naive idealism, but rather evidence of emotional maturity and the ability to see things from a higher perspective. Each person has a unique story without parallel, and in this story, every event, every encounter, and every loss plays a specific role. Nothing happens by chance. Everything is part of a grand journey, and awareness of this fact leads to the understanding that the universe is guiding a person towards their true destiny. The individual is much closer to their true essence than they might imagine, and their awakening occurs faster than they dare admit. Despite fears and doubts, the very act of seeking answers demonstrates a readiness for development and a rejection of superficial existence. It is important to remember that a person is not merely the result of external circumstances, but rather one who makes decisions about how to react to those circumstances. If they choose the path of healing, transformation, and integration, their story changes, life becomes filled with meaning, and the soul begins to blossom. The human soul does not strive for simple formulas. It yearns for meaning and depth. With extraordinary clarity, the speaker conveyed the idea that the greatest privilege in a person's life is the revelation of their true self. However, only a few dare to embark on this challenging journey, as it entails the necessity of relinquishing former perceptions of oneself. It is about allowing those versions of oneself that once served as protection but have now become obstacles to development to die. It is necessary to pass through the crucible of transformation without a clear idea of what lies ahead, but it is there, beyond the known, that truth lies. When the speaker referred to the shadow, it was not about condemnation, but about integration. That part of the personality that a person suppresses and denies does not disappear without a trace. Ignoring it only amplifies it, making it more aggressive and destructive. The shadow is not evil, but simply that which has not been acknowledged. At each stage of life, it will persistently remind one of itself until the person dares to look at it with love. For only those who dare to look into their darkness can truly discover their light. Many people find themselves trapped by the expectations of others, parents imposing unfulfilled dreams, society dictating how one should be, religions condemning for being different. But the speaker declared with conviction, inner freedom begins with a conscious and loving rebellion against everything that is not authentic. It is choosing one's own path, even if no one understands it. It is living in accordance with one's beliefs, even if it entails the loss of approval. In this lies true spirituality, living from one's essence. There exists a specific feeling of isolation that is not eliminated by the presence of other people. It is the loneliness of the soul, arising from a lack of attention to its needs. A person may be surrounded by many people, but if their life does not align with their inner beliefs and aspirations, they experience a sense of emptiness. CarlJung asserted that the soul has a strong need for depth and meaningfulness, and neglecting this need leads to illness, disappointment, and loss of life's path. In this regard, silence becomes a healing remedy, self-analysis a source of spiritual nourishment, and inner honesty a path to healing. Every stage of a person's life, including those they would like to forget, and even the darkest periods, has its purpose. In these moments, truths are revealed that would never become apparent in comfortable circumstances. It may not be immediately clear, but in time one can look back and acknowledge that the losses experienced fostered growth, the rejections compelled introspection, and the crises facilitated a return to one's true self. Jung emphasized that the unconscious initially manifests as an unavoidable fate, and subsequently as an opportunity for development. The most challenging emotions to manage possess the greatest potential for transformation, if one learns to understand them. Rage is not merely a destructive fire, but also a hidden strength. Sorrow is not only a source of pain, but also an indication of deep sensitivity. Fear is not a sign of weakness, but a protective mechanism that is often misinterpreted. Jung urged a re-evaluation of emotions rather than their suppression, as suppressed feelings lead to illness, while acknowledged feelings lead to liberation. To change one's life, only one thing is necessary: absolute honesty with oneself. Jung noted that self-knowledge is a painful process, as it involves confronting truths that one has long avoided, but at the same time it brings profound liberation. Once a person is aware of their true essence, no one can manipulate, exploit, or define them. They reclaim their inner center, and from that moment on, everything changes. When others do not share one's thoughts and aspirations, it is not a sign of error, but rather evidence of being ahead of one's time. The development of consciousness is not always a collective process. Often it is a solitary journey, but it is this solitude that becomes a sacred space where the soul finds the opportunity to listen to itself without being distracted by external noise. As Jung asserted, significant changes originate in the silence of internal dialogue, invisible to others, but felt as an inner fire. Sometimes what seems like a step backward is actually a period of internal restructuring. Jung also emphasized that chaos is a necessary condition for the emergence of a new order. If confusion reigns today and there is no clear understanding of the path ahead, one should not despair, as this state is merely a period of prebhavania in the womb of impending transformation. One is no longer who they once were, but not yet who they are destined to be, and this uncertainty may cause discomfort, but it is sacred. The people who have had the greatest impact on life, whether positive or negative, acted as instruments of the unconscious, intended to open eyes to certain aspects of one's own personality. Cause and effect relationships are not always pleasant. Sometimes they manifest in a harsh form, but they are always accurate. Jung explained this using the metaphor of the alchemist. Everything that happens to a person is part of the process of transforming the lead of emotional wounds into the gold of consciousness, but first one must pass through the furnace of trials. True success lies not in the accumulation of material wealth and achievements, but in filling life with meaning. Carl Gustav Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist and philosopher, once remarked that many people, having reached their desired heights, realize with disappointment that they conquered the wrong peak. This bitter discovery stems from the fact that they never questioned the true desires of their soul, blindly following someone else's path. In the moment of such realization, a person experiences dizziness from the loss of bearings, but also a sense of liberation, because now they are free to choose their own path. There are emotional wounds that are not subject to the healing effects of time. They heal only through awareness. It is not enough to simply drift along with the flow of time. It is necessary to delve into memories, rethink them, and integrate them into one's life experience. Jung emphasized that it is not about forgetting, but about a new perspective on the past, about perceiving the wound not as a stigma defining the personality, but as an incentive for awakening. The human body is also a conductor of the unconscious, expressing its language through chronic pain, recurring illnesses, and muscle tension. All these manifestations carry a symbolic message. Jung, who deeply studied the relationship between mind and body, concluded that the soul uses all available channels to convey important information to a person. If the soul remains unheard, the body begins to scream, and if this scream is ignored, life inflicts blows until the person stops and listens to themselves. Everyone has the inalienable right to change their path, rethink themselves, and abandon their former identity. A person is not obliged to be true to their past. Their true calling is to be true to their evolution. Jung argued that the true self is not something frozen, it is dynamic, capable of expanding, contracting, and restructuring. A person is given the right to move forward, explore new horizons, and make different choices. The unconscious holds not only traumatic experiences, but also hidden talents, forgotten abilities, dormant dreams, and suppressed passions. Jung believed that deep within every soul lies a yearning for creativity, self-expression, and authenticity. If this inner voice remains unheard, the soul's energy turns against the individual, manifesting as disappointment, fatigue, and existential emptiness. The soul does not tolerate exile. When the external world becomes unbearable, it is a sure sign that one's internal world needs attention and care. Jung noted that often what irritates us most in the external world is a reflection of what we neglect within ourselves. The problem lies not in others, but in the loss of connection with one's own self. As soon as a person returns to themselves, the world around them begins to change, and there is no need for others to change. People are susceptible to ancestral traumas, inherited beliefs, and unresolved stories of ancestors. Jung spoke of archetypes as collective patterns that influence a person's life, even if they are unaware of it. However, everyone can break this vicious cycle and be the first in their lineage to dare to awaken. By doing so, one heals not only themselves but also those who came before and those who will come after. Consciousness is a fire that transforms everything around it. Jung asserted that even a small spark of consciousness can illuminate the darkest darkness. It is not necessary to have answers to all questions. It is enough to have the courage to look truth in the eye, ask oneself one true question, stop blaming others, and start taking responsibility for one's life. This is enough to initiate a process of positive change. When a listener feels an internal response to what they hear, it cannot be ignored. It is the voice of the soul, signaling readiness for change, for awareness, forgiveness, acceptance of past experiences, and understanding that no event was accidental, but was part of a larger design that is beginning to unfold. The listener has reached this moment because they are not satisfied with superficial explanations. They have an unquenchable thirst for truth, a brave and vulnerable soul striving forward. Many stop in the face of pain, but the listener has chosen the path of knowledge, doubt, and healing, thereby beginning to change their destiny. Even negative experiences have become fertile ground for awakening. Difficulties were not a punishment, but a bridge. Chaos, not an end, but a beginning. As Jung said, chaos opens the way to creation, and the listener is on the threshold of a new life based on acceptance rather than denial, a life more sincere, deeper, and in accordance with their true essence. Now the listener realizes that they are not a victim of circumstances, but the main character in a carefully planned story. Everything made sense even before they could understand it. The soul exists outside of time, in a dimension where wounds turn into keys, which are now in the listener's hands to open new horizons. They are stronger, wiser, and freer than they were told, and now, knowing this, they can stop repeating painful scenarios of the past. They have the opportunity to write a new story, make conscious choices, use their shadow side as a guide, and wounds as teachers, because every part of their being, even the most damaged, carries a valuable message. Jung sought not to comfort, but to awaken people, and this video continues his work. If the listener felt an emotional response, if some words touched them to the depths of their soul, it cannot be ignored. It is their true self breaking through the cracks, and it should not be silenced. Heed the call of your inner voice, for it will show you the right path. The author suggests capturing this moment of truth with a phrase expressing your devotion to yourself. Write it down as a symbol of awakening. And if this message has touched the depths of your soul, leave the words in the comments. My life is gaining meaning and now I realize it. This way you will signal that you have awakened, that you are ready for change, first and foremost, for yourself. This is not the end, but only a starting point. The knowledge gained should not become a burden, but a compass in life. And to help you with this, the author will guide you through a narrative that will touch your feelings and show a reflection of your path. You will see real-life examples of how to apply the knowledge gained in practice. In the future, there will be not just explanations, but experiences. You will see how a soul that has embarked on the path of awakening feels, lives, and transforms. After all, by observing the transformation of another person, the unconscious mind more easily assimilates lessons not only through theory but also through emotions, symbols, and deep connection. Remember, you are not alone on this path, and although it may be painful, every step towards yourself is a step towards freedom, and inner freedom is priceless. That is why this channel exists, to remind you amidst the noise of life that awakening, healing, and accepting your story, with all its scars, is possible. So the time has come to begin. Immerse yourself in a story, perhaps fictional, but entirely real. Make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and prepare to enter a world of symbols where knowledge is embodied in emotion and transformation. When Sebastian was fired, he felt neither anger nor fear. He was overcome by a quiet, all-consuming emptiness. After 15 years with the company, he had become part of the furniture, a cog in the machine, a number in an endless payroll. And suddenly, he was nothing, invisible, superfluous. At that moment, Sebastian felt something inside him fade away. He left the office, clutching his termination papers. It was raining outside, as if the heavens were mourning the collapse of his world. Sebastian wandered aimlessly through the wet streets, without an umbrella, without haste, without direction. It was as if his physical shell continued to move along a well-worn track, while his true self remained frozen somewhere within the walls of the hated office, to which he no longer belonged. "What now?" flashed through his mind, but the only response was a crushing silence, a harbinger of the moment when fate ruthlessly tears a person from their familiar habitat. He returned to his house, soaked to the bone, and a shiver ran through him, not so much from the outside, but from within. His wife, Valeria, greeted him with a silent, understanding look. He only had to nod in response, and she understood everything immediately. No questions were needed. However, that night, while Valeria was lost in sleep, Sebastian did not close his eyes, staring intently at the ceiling. He felt something ancient and primal awakening in the depths of his being, as if a long-forgotten voice was beginning to whisper to him what he did not want to hear. This was far from the first feeling of discomfort that Sebastian had experienced, although he tried not to admit it even to himself. From a young age, he had learned the lesson of needing to be useful, efficient, and functional. To be good, as his father had instructed him. But good for whom? This question remained unanswered. He diligently met the expectations of others, neglecting his own desires, which, in truth, he did not even know. Sebastian never asked himself this question. Over time, Sebastian's familiar way of life cracked, and the internal structure that supported his existence crumbled to pieces. The usual routine lost its appeal. The phone fell silent, and fake smiles ceased to appear on the horizon. For the first time, he realized that his world was merely an artfully crafted papier-mâché decoration, beautiful only at first glance, but devoid of inner content. This realization caused him far more emotional pain than the loss of his job. One day, while sorting through old books in his late father's library, he accidentally came across a volume he had not noticed before. Man and His Symbols by CarlJung. Opening the book out of mere curiosity, he could not tear himself away from one phrase. Depression is like a woman dressed in black. If she arrives, don't push her away, but invite her to sit down and listen to what she wants to tell you. These words struck a deep chord within him. It had never occurred to him before that his suffering could be a source of valuable lessons. From that day on, his unusual, lonely, and profound journey into himself began. He began to write, read, immerse himself in silence and reflection, for the first time in his life turning his gaze inward. He had no clear idea of what he was looking for, but he felt an overwhelming need to keep moving forward. He began to remember his dreams, write down the images that arose in his consciousness, and conduct internal dialogues that defied explanation. The external world around him seemed to freeze, but his inner world, on the contrary, began to come alive and fill with light. One night, he had a dream in which he saw a boy locked in a glass box. The boy was crying desperately, but no one could hear him. Sebastian watched him from the sidelines, feeling his own helplessness. Waking up, he immediately understood who this boy was. It was himself, his forgotten self, his wounded soul, his true self. For the first time in his life, he felt that he had to do more than just survive. He had to save this boy. He sought help from a Jungian psychologist and began attending therapy sessions. At first, he was skeptical, but something inside him told him that she could be trusted. She guided him, asking questions that he had never been asked before. What part of you froze in distant childhood? What voice have you suppressed within yourself for many years? What dreams have you buried in order to meet the expectations of those around you? And with each new question, something began to stir inside him, something broke, and something new was born. He began to realize his many masks, the obedient son, the ideal employee, the husband who does not cause trouble. All of this was just a form of defense, behind which the real Sebastian was hiding. The one who dreamed of painting, but gave up on that dream considering it impractical. The one who loved music, but stopped playing it in order not to appear frivolous. The one who wanted to live differently, but adapted to circumstances in order to survive. During one of the sessions, the psychotherapist told him about the archetype of the hero. Sebastian, you are on the path of the hero. You have been torn from the familiar world of comfort and faced your inner demons, but all this is necessary so that you can discover your true essence. And for the first time, he felt that his suffering had a purpose, that his crisis was not accidental, and that his life had a hidden meaning. His relationship with Valeria began to change. She watched him with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. He was no longer the predictable, correct, and self-confident person she was used to. Now, in front of her was a man who was able to feel, cry, ask questions, and dare to say, "I don't know who I am, but I want to find out." And this openness and vulnerability did not destroy their connection, but, on the contrary, made it even stronger. Of course, not all days were cloudless. There were dark periods when he was tormented by guilt, fear, and doubt, when it seemed to him that he was losing everything, his personality, his image, his past. But something inside him, some new flame, perhaps his soul, pushed him to keep moving forward because, despite the pain, he felt healing, and despite the suffering, he was awakening to a new life. The image of his father began to appear more and more often in his dreams, a man who was strict, aloof, always demanding, and stingy with expressions of feelings. In one of these dreams, his father handed him an empty notebook and said, "Now it's your turn, Sebastian." Sebastian woke up in tears, realizing that his life was no longer a repetition of someone else's script, but a new story that he had to write himself. One day, he decided to do something that had previously seemed unthinkable to him. He picked up the guitar again, taking it out of the dusty closet where it had been lying for about 20 years. Playing it, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was young. Freedom. It wasn't just music, it was memories, it was his essence, it was a return to himself. He signed up for an art therapy course. There, standing in front of a blank canvas, he felt fear again, but also excitement. The boy from the glass box began to break free, getting dirty with paints, drawing and expressing everything that he had suppressed in himself for so long. And with each new stroke, the wound in his soul healed, and each colored fragment took its place in the overall picture. One afternoon, while painting, a phrase flashed through his head like lightning. "Everything in my life was not in vain, even this, especially this." And he broke down with gratitude because he finally understood that life had not broken him, but only directed him on a different path, that his loss had become a door to a new life, that the dismissal from work had become the beginning of something new, that his crisis was a call to awakening. Sebastian embodies millions of people living in detachment from themselves, people who meet all external expectations but feel empty inside. In him we see a life lived from an adapted ego, from a personality that Jung calls a social mask, which we use to function in society, a person formed under the influence of external requirements, performing certain roles, effectively responding to external stimuli, but completely forgetting about their true essence. When Sebastian loses his job, he loses not just a source of income, he loses his apparent identity, which he has built over many years, based on a sense of duty, sacrifice, and a constant desire to be correct. The dismissal becomes a turning point that exposes the fragility of this personality, and this is where Jung offers us a key to understanding. Crises are not just interruptions in life, they are revelations. They expose the discrepancy between the social self and the true self. The phrase that Sebastian finds in Jung's book is not accidental, it is synchronicity, a deeply Jungian concept describing a meaningful connection between external events and internal processes. He did not choose this book consciously, but the book chose him because his unconscious was already ready for awakening. and when the soul is ready, life responds with symbols. The dream of a child imprisoned in a prison is one of the most important moments in the whole narrative. Jung believed that dreams are symbolic messages from the unconscious, and that each character in a dream represents a part of the dreamer himself. The child in this case is none other than Sebastian's wounded inner child, the one who was suppressed, silenced, and emotionally abandoned in order to meet the expectations of the adult world. The dream does not seek to hurt, it seeks to save him. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the concept of the shadow holds a special place, representing the totality of repressed aspects of the personality, rejected by the individual as unacceptable within the framework of social norms or their personal environment. In Sebastian's case, his shadow side accumulates suppressed expressions of sensitivity, creative potential, and the desire for independence in decision-making. These parts of his self have been deeply buried, but the subconscious does not lose sight of them, waiting for the right moment for their manifestation. The Jungian approach in therapy, which Sebastian resorts to, is not just a correction of behavior, but a process of restoring the integrity of the personality through the reintegration of repressed elements. In each session, he confronts his own masks, unresolved psychological traumas, and beliefs inherited from his father. Despite the painfulness of these confrontations, they have a liberating effect, since the awareness and recognition of one's wound allows a person to free themselves from its power, integrate it into their experience, and transform it into a source of wisdom. The archetype of the father, in turn, manifests as a symbol of power, demandingness, and emotional coldness. This universal image embodies authority, law, and a sense of duty. In Sebastian's inner world, the dominant inner father obliges him to be efficient, logical, and restrained, suppressing manifestations of spontaneity, tenderness, and playfulness. The dream in which the father figure hands the hero a blank notebook appears as a metaphorical transfer of power. Sebastian receives a kind of permission to rethink his life story, relying on his own deep aspirations. His passion for guitar and art in this context is not just a pleasant pastime, but a genuine expression of his inner world, channels through which his true self, the integrity of his being, speaking in Jung's language, gets the opportunity to manifest. Sebastian's return to music is not just a return to a forgotten hobby, it is a return to himself, to the space where there is no place for demands for usefulness, productivity, or approval from the outside. There is only the need to be, and this state of being becomes a powerful healing factor. It is important to note that the driving force of this journey is not a blind pursuit of success, but a deep need to find meaning. Here it is appropriate to recall Viktor Frankl's words that a person who does not find meaning in their suffering is doomed to destruction. Sebastian's depressive state was caused not only by the loss of his job, but also by many years of ignoring the needs of his own soul, which desperately cried out for purpose. The dismissal only served as a catalyst for realizing this problem. Sebastian's relationship with Valeria reflects an important principle. When one of the partners in a couple embarks on the path of self-knowledge and individuation, it affects the entire relationship system. The couple has to make a choice, to develop together or to part ways. In this situation, Valeria decides to support Sebastian, even without fully understanding the changes that are happening to him. This is an example of conscious love, which consists in accompanying another person in their mysterious transformation, in respecting their transformation, without seeking to control this process. On a dramatic stretch of his path, Sebastian experiences a deep crisis, which Carl Jung called the dark night of the soul, a time when the familiar world crumbles and clarity eludes. This is a painful period of transformation, when the ego gradually loses its power, giving way to the awakening soul. This process is far from straightforward. It is full of ups and downs, moments of enlightenment and periods of deep confusion. However, it is in this shaky uncertainty that the most significant revelations are born. It is noteworthy that Sebastian embarks on this thorny path, not of his own free will, but under pressure from circumstances as a result of personal collapse. And this was also foreseen by Jung. Often the soul needs the ego to crash so that it can pave its way. In an ideal scenario, this happens consciously, voluntarily, but more often it is suffering that becomes the catalyst for transformation. Sebastian's story also highlights the importance of symbols in the process of self-knowledge. The image of a child in a dream, a blank sheet of paper, a forgotten guitar. All these are symbolic elements filled with powerful psychic energy. In depth psychology, such symbols serve as a kind of gateway to the unconscious. They do not have a single interpretation, but awaken in a person a direct emotional understanding. And this understanding, although not always expressible in words, has a transformative effect on the personality. In Jungian psychology, a symptom is seen not as an annoying obstacle, but as a significant message from the depths of the psyche. Feelings of anxiety, overwhelming sadness, or a lack of purpose in life are not flaws that need immediate correction, but rather encrypted signals that need interpretation. Sebastian's story is an example of healing not through suppressing symptoms, but through attentively listening to their voice. He recovers by following the directions contained within these signals, turning them into a kind of compass that points the way to wholeness. In the context of this story, we can turn to the concept of the anima. CarlJung defined the anima as the feminine principle in the male psyche, associated with intuition, receptivity, and the capacity for emotional and spiritual connection. When Sebastian finds solace in writing, dreaming, and music, he establishes contact with his anima. Contrary to popular belief, this does not make him weaker. On the contrary, he gains strength, because only a person who has managed to integrate their sensitive side is capable of achieving genuine self-knowledge. Painting, on the other hand, acts as a symbolic action through which a person brings the content of the unconscious into the external world. By daubing the canvas with paints, Sebastian expresses what cannot be described verbally. He extracts from the depths of his being unspoken emotions, buried memories, and unprocessed pain, transforming them into forms, colors, and strokes, thereby freeing himself from their oppressive burden. This is the essence of art therapy, to provide the soul with the opportunity to speak in its own language, unfettered by the constraints of logic and rationality. Each of his movements, like a pendulum, deflects him from the fictional self, carefully created over the years, and relentlessly draws him to the true essence that has always lived within him. And although this process is fraught with losses, internal turmoil, and loss of stability, it also carries within it the seed of rebirth. After all, there is no dawn without sunset, and self-awareness is impossible without a bit of destruction of old beliefs. In his transformation, Sebastian unwittingly awakens the archetype of the wounded hero. As Jung argued, heroism lies not in the absence of suffering, but in the courage to face one's wounds and turn them into a road leading to healing. Sebastian experienced a fall, that is undeniable, but he managed to rise, gaining a completely different vision of the world. He no longer strives to return to the past, to the person he once was. Now his goal is to become who he was always meant to be, but whose revelation he previously lacked the courage for. The phrase he uttered at the end of the first part of his story, "Everything in my life had its meaning, even this, especially this," succinctly encapsulates the essence of Jung's teaching. After all, there are no separate, random events in life. There is an invisible thread that permeates every moment of our existence. And this thread, although sometimes hidden from view, invariably leads us to ourselves, to the realization of our true nature. It is suggested to reflect on a deep question that perhaps has not previously arisen in the mind with such acuity. What if all the accumulated life experience, with its ups and downs, was necessary for spiritual awakening? It is recommended to stop, discard hasty answers, and, filling the lungs with air, turn to your feelings. It is necessary to look at your story, at every loss, every unspoken word, every restrained impulse, every mistake and failure in love. Is it possible to admit, even for a moment, that none of these Events was a random coincidence that even the most painful experiences had a specific purpose that is only now beginning to manifest. Carl Jung, an outstanding psychologist, did not call for passive submission, but sought to show that life possesses a mind that surpasses the understanding of the ego. He believed, and now everyone can share this belief, that the soul directs a person to wholeness, and, despite the apparent chaotic nature of the path, it always leads to self-knowledge. Therefore, the question is posed even more directly. What if anxiety is a desperate call from the inner self, demanding attention? What if past failures were a way for the soul to protect you from the wrong choice? And what if the people who caused the most pain, unknowingly, served as mirrors reflecting unhealed emotional wounds? Deep within each person lies something more than just a set of thoughts and sensations. It is the soul, intuitively feeling the harmony of the universe, even when logic is powerless. From now on, freed from the shackles of blind chance, everyone becomes the creator of their destiny, realizing that their life path is not a chaotic accumulation of events, but a carefully calibrated map where every experience has its meaning. Within each of us lies a whole universe, eager to be discovered and known. Yes, diving into yourself can be painful because you will have to face hidden fears and unresolved conflicts. But isn't it worth the risk to find a true purpose and stop being a puppet in someone else's hands? Instead of berating yourself for past mistakes, ask yourself, what did this experience teach me? Like Socrates, we don't offer ready-made answers, but rather guide you with questions that, penetrating to the very heart, open up new horizons. The purpose of this channel is not to give illusory solutions, but to encourage awakening, to create the discomfort necessary for growth. What scenario is repeated time and time again in your life? What dream have you forgotten, succumbing to fear or the desire to please others? What part of yourself have you stubbornly ignored, and now it persistently demands attention? What conversation with yourself are you running away from? What kind of life are you ready to see in a new light right now? Let the answers to pressing questions arise in the soothing silence of the inner world, where truth does not need loud statements, but invariably makes itself known. If the viewed material evoked a deep response in the soul, and there is a feeling that individual elements of the worldview begin to form into a single whole, even if it is difficult to express in words, it is worth sharing this discovery in the comments, writing, "My story has a purpose, and today I begin to understand it." This step can be taken for your own sake, as a sign of attention to the inner child who still craves recognition and understanding, for the sake of the tired adult who deserves peace and rest, for the sake of the future version of yourself who will need courage, clarity, and awareness of the meaning of life. The author expresses gratitude to the viewers for staying with him until the end. It is emphasized that this is not just the end of viewing, but the starting point of a new journey, a personal path for everyone. The author promises new meetings in the following videos and reminds us that the human soul never makes mistakes in its choices.